Power on. Push the button up. Nice. High beam. The 2019 KTM 790 Adventure, or any other variant of it, including the 890 Adventure, the rally bikes, all have one thing in common, in that they really could use some good lighting as auxiliary to what you have with the factory stuff. So Denali Electronics and Twisted Throttle sent me these massive D4 lights, and I've got them installed on my bike here. It was supposed to be simple. I made it complicated, and I'll walk you through how I did all that. But one thing is for sure, they're plenty bright, and I will never ever need any more light than this. Although the system with the Cansmart controller, you can tie in more lights if you so desire. So let me show you some other stuff, the routing, and give you some insight into how this came to be. So this is the Cansmart controller kit for the KTM motorcycles. This is an awesome control module because it gives you the ability to customize what you have accessories on the bike doing. There are 4 different circuits that come off of this controller, and you can manipulate them all by plugging in using your laptop and changing the settings. Everything from dimness or brightness when you start the bike or when you hit a switch like your high beam switch, to coordinating like the horn with your lights, etc. That would be on other bikes though. Unfortunately on the 790, 890, the electronics are a little more locked up than they are on other bikes like BMWs. So I was interested to see what I could and couldn't do on my bike. The kit comes with a lot of extra stuff that I didn't end up using. First thing I had to do was remove all my plastics, as you can see, just to get access to everything. So that's a pile there of all of it. They're just screws, and there are a couple of pressure tabs where it just pushes in and holds. So go gently and make sure that it's not a sliding tab you have to pull off on the back or a pull-out tab on the front. But once you get it to this state, including removing this bonnet for the battery, you're set. You can start with your installation. I first mounted the brackets for the lights, and these are really good brackets. Another kit from Denali and Twisted Throttle. The brackets are about a 1/4 inch thick. So you can see the bracket that the lights are sitting on. They use an existing screw up here that holds this winglet on, or wind deflector, and then they have a clamp that goes around this support bar for the headlight assembly. So this is where I decided to mount the control module, and I looked at some other places like down here on top of the airbox. You can see I've already got some other stuff mounted here for other accessories that I'm running, and what I found was that it stood up too much and got in the way of the seat, because the seat rides on these frame rails and these bumpers, and it was just putting pressure on the control module. An interesting thing about the control module is that it has a flashing light on the side here, and you'll probably see it momentarily flash green. When the bike isn't running, it should be flashing green on and off, and when it's running it will be on solid green. It'll let you know if you have something wired wrong. It'll give you different colors and different patterns, but ideally that's what you want to see. As I said, there's different harnesses or circuits coming off of this. Each one of them has a color assigned. Like this one is the white or gray, and you can plug in harnesses going to other accessories with this. I only end up using one, which is this red one. You can see the red wiring here, and this goes out to my control harness that goes out to the lights in the front. What I did was I had an awful lot of length to work with, and the other harnesses, I tucked them down into here there's a nice little void on the right side, and you can just hang them in that pocket. With this harness that goes out to the lights was kind of tricky because it comes to a Y at the end, and one goes left light, the other goes to the right light. And I had only and barely enough length on the light harnesses to get it through here underneath, and it comes out along the rail here and goes underneath. This is the connector to the light. The Y is underneath the battery in here. So I ran it across, and I just had enough room to hook up with the light coming from the other side. So this is the harness coming from the light on the right side. You can see the connector right there, and you've got the main harness coming from the other side connecting here, and it came through that passageway there. I know it's kind of hard to see, but there is just enough length to connect it right here. So as you can see right here on the light on the left side, there's a little gap right here where I can route the wire through the fairing. So when the other fairing bolts up here, it won't be in the way. And I just ran that underneath and over the rad hose, which I strapped it to, and back over to the control module that's in there. The other thing that I really found useful in feeding the wires through these tight spots is a tool like this. Now granted, you could just remove the gas tank altogether and make your life really easy, but I just didn't want to do that. Instead, I have this neat little retrieval tool, which I have and the ability to grab the harness and then feed it back through, and this thing's flexible too. If you don't have one of these tools, this is something really good to add to your collection, and they're not expensive. You can get them, I think, Harbor Freight, Princess Auto, I don't know where you're shopping, but very handy. So once you've got the one light connected here, crossed over, connected there on the two Ys coming off the main harness, going back to the red connector off the control unit, you have to decide what to do with all the extra length of the harness that they supply you in the kit. So what I did was, this is the harness here, and I came up, I connected it here, going behind the bumpers, following the frame, and because I had enough length, I went all the way back here and down and around, came down here, and this is where it got tricky. I had to sneak it in behind here of this cross member and also this cross member. There is not enough room to push it through with the connector on the end, so I disconnected the connector from the leads and then reconnected them after. But as you can see, this is just the most awesome routing. It's completely out of the way. It won't rub on anything if you push it down here, and it's secure and comes all the way up to the red harness or red circuit connector off the control unit. So the way that you do that is you get one of these precision screwdrivers and you push it down inside here right by the pins, and if you look closely you'll see a little locking tab that you can push down and up just to relieve the lock that's holding the metal tab in there, and then you can pull it out. Now of course make sure that you get them back in the same place you started with. I just took a photo for reference of where this hole is on the connector, and usually it goes it's red, yellow, and then black at the bottom, just for reference. So this is a dimmer switch that you're going to need to control the intensity of the lights, and I mounted it up here using some two-sided tape up against the left handlebar unit. This is the other end of the switch harness coming to this connector. Now if you won't get this connector in your kit, it's actually a small white one. And there's nothing wrong with it. I just damaged mine by mistake, so I had to install this Deutsch connector instead. And I mean, if it happened to you, you could use anything, spade connectors, whatever you like. You could even solder it, but I like having the option to pull it apart. And that just comes out of the main harness here. So there are still like 3 harnesses still in this kit that I didn't use. One of them is for the horn. Unfortunately, unless you have the sound bomb horn, you can't tie it into the system that's controlled by this unit. So that's in the box still, as are 2 more harnesses to connect in extra auxiliary lights. I could have run another harness back to my tail light. I put on one of these Denali B6 auxiliary brake lights, which I love. They make you so much more visible. I find a lot of tail lights are very dull and dim, but that one is not. Brake? Brake? So as I said, there is a circuit for the brake light coming off this controller, but I just found I was getting too much stuff running along here. So I went a different route with hooking up the B6. I'll show you that here. Alright, so here is the B6 in place, and what I used was a couple of fasteners on the original plate, but in order to mount it like this, I had to cut off this reflector that normally sits there. This thing was also not sized very right for my license plate, and so what I did was, after I cut this off, I actually resized my license plate. They just changed things here in Alberta so you don't need the stickers anymore. So it shouldn't matter as long as the numbers are free. So here's the wiring harness coming out of the B6. I routed it in behind here, and there's a little opening right here on this plastic panel. If you remove these 2 screws, you can get access to an opening right there that the turn signal harnesses and taillight harnesses go up and into the subframe. And that's how I got it in there. This is the harness coming up from below from the B6 light. And what you've got is 3 wires, a ground, a hot, which is red, and then it's hard to notice it, but this is orange. And that's the brake actuation light to get you the brighter brake signal. And as opposed to using the harness from the Cansmart controller, I just use these 2 connections at the back of the bike here that are auxiliary, and that's the black with red stripe and this sort of reddish colored one. The ground is the pinkish red, and the keyed power is the black with red stripe. I put on a couple of connectors plugged in there, and those will live happily back in here once I'm done shooting this video, along with the rest of the harness. And what I'll be left with, the only thing I had to add on to this was this orange wire, and that I used a posi tap to go into the white with green stripe wire inside this harness, which is the signal from your brake lever or brake pedal. So what that ends up doing is illuminating the B6 all the time using the keyed power, and whenever I actually use the brake pedal, it gets extra bright using the signal wire. These posi taps work really well. I've already got my multifunction turn signals teed in using the same posi tap, and it's still working good. Once you have everything cinched in place and tied down, you want to make sure it's not rubbing on any of the post terminals for the battery. I just ran a tie wrap around all the connections and this big positive terminal coming off, or positive cable coming off the positive terminal. And I was concerned about putting this bonnet back on with all this stuff up in here, but as it turned out, that fits perfectly. So just be aware of that. Test fit it before you go and decide, you've found the permanent home for the components. And another one would be the seat, and you want to ideally make sure that either in the high or the low position that you're not going to pinch any wires. So yeah, when you set your seat on, have a look. Now of course I don't have the little front connectors there, but I know that this will be good, and I can go on the low setting too. I gotta line it up here. So there's the low setting, and yeah, like I said, just make sure that nothing is getting pinched. Once you've got all your harnesses run and everything's good, then you'll want to connect the final connections at the battery terminals, which is as simple as just loosening off the bolts, slipping the eyelet in place, and running the bolts through into the terminal. Then you've got power and you're ready to go with the whole system. So here's how my final installation ended up looking with everything in place. You can see everything's tied up very nicely along the rail, going back, and in the rear quadrant, everything's stowed out of the way. It's December now, and riding season is basically over for me. So it's time to recap how the Denali Cansmart Controller and the D4 lights and the B6 auxiliary tail light have all worked together over the last, I don't know, I've probably ridden at least from July until September, October, when the snow finally flew. And in a word, it's been, well, two words, near flawless. It has done exactly as Denali has advertised. It's been very tough, held together with the exception of two connectors. And remember the one that is located right about here that I talked about in the installation portion? Well, I found that when I got back from riding to Sturgis that my lights quit working. They were like blinking just a little bit instead of being on fully. And I couldn't get that to change until I got home, and I realized that connector was loose. It was causing a bit of an open circuit. Once I replaced that connector, there's been zero issues ever since with it, and the lights are just as bright as day one. There's no fade, no nothing. The B6 especially has just been terrific. Also, that little white connector that I broke, that I replaced when I brought the bike in for its 30,000 kilometer service where the valves are inspected. I think the dealership that did it probably got a little rammy with that. They're very fine gauge wires, and I just found they were broken. So I ended up putting on some spade connectors, and we'll see how that goes. Even that did not connect all that great because there's such fine wire. I think they're like 18 gauge wire, maybe even 16. The only beef I have with it is with the connectors. Now let me show you one more thing with that. So I'm going to pull this connector apart. This is the red circuit that runs to the lights. I haven't undone this plug since the installation. There's been months and many thousands of miles. So you can see it is stopping most of the dirt, but not all of the dirt. I think some of this fell in when I pulled it apart. So there hasn't been any issue with it working, but there isn't an actual rubber seal in this connector. Now I've ridden through plenty of rain and water, and I haven't had any issue with problems to do with dampness, but I think the potential is definitely there. Now that is just living nicely there. Here are the spade connectors I was just talking about, which I crimped on, and that allows me to pull it apart should I want to. Again, this is the wire that goes to the switch up on the handlebars over there. So there's some question marks for me about long-term longevity with these connectors, especially since I've already replaced 2 of them. As I sit here cozied up by the fireplace, remembering the awesome riding year that it was, despite the pandemic, I'm pondering the most important question. Is it worth the money? Does it make dollars and cents? Now, as far as functionality goes, the lights were fantastic when I was going through these really dark, decommissioned train tunnels on the Colombian Western Trail this year. I absolutely loved having them, and they made it so much safer for me and the people I was riding with. Almost 8,800 lumens in a dark train tunnel is exactly what you want. They were so bright that I actually looked like a train coming out the other side. Other than a couple of issues with some connectors giving me grief, I'm satisfied with it. Now, the breakdown for the cost is $990 total US for the system. That includes $429 for the 2 D4 lights, $260 for the Cansmart Controller, $33 for the handlebar switch, $40 for a Y splitter to go to each light, and $110 for the B6 auxiliary brake light, along with $118 for the aluminum light mounting brackets. If you're the kind of person who wants the flexibility, control lights and a horn, a sound bomb horn, and a brake light, and several other circuits on the bike, the Cansmart is probably the system you want. For me, there's a new controller that Denali just came out with called the Dial Dim. It's $70 US cheaper than setting yourself up with the Cansmart system. So if you really don't care about strobe lights and sound bomb horns being coordinated with all this stuff, if you just want to have 2 light circuits controlled via a rotary dial on your handlebar, the Dial Dim is the way to go. Plus you save $70. Probably does about 60 to 70% of what the Cansmart one will. I think if I was to do it over again, I would also run the new D3 lights instead of the D4. The D4 is kind of overkill. These are fairly heavy, like these are 1.5 pounds for each light, so 3 extra pounds onto the bike. Doesn't sound like a lot, but as a 790 owner, I like the fact that I have the lightest motorcycle in the middleweight adventure class and the greatest power to weight ratio in the class as well. So every pound needs to be accounted for, is what I'm driving at. So the new D3s, I think, would probably be the way that I would want to go. I think it would be enough. They look really good. They're also very bright. I think they're 3,000 lumens a side, so you get 6,000 as opposed to 8,800. That would work fine for me. One thing's for sure, this is a good system. I really doubt that there are better ones out there. I haven't tested them all, so I can't really say. But you can't go wrong with this. Hopefully you don't have the connector issues that I did, but those are fairly easy to fix even if you do. So for Web Bike World, I'm Jim Pruner.